Hi, I'm Donna Creef, Dare County Planning Director. I also serve as the coordinator of the OBX CRS Users Group. Community Rating System is what CRS stands for. All of the local governments in Dare County and Currituck County are participants in the CRS rating program. This is a voluntary effort of the National Flood Insurance Program in which participating communities receive points for their efforts in the CRS program. These points translate into discounts on flood insurance policies for unincorporated Dare County. We are currently a Class 7 rating in the CRS program, which is a 15% discount on all flood insurance policies. As part of the CRS program, we are required to conduct outreach activities every year. These are focused on the importance of flood insurance and how to mitigate flood hazards. This year, as part of our outreach activities, we are inviting local stakeholder groups to monthly meetings of the OBX CRS meetings. This month, we invited in insurance and mortgage professionals to have conversations about flood insurance and the new flood maps that we anticipate will be adopted for Dare County in the early part of 2020. My name is Donna Creef, and I'm the Dare County Planning Director, for those of you who don't know me. Thank you for coming today. I know that everybody's busy, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and come meet with us. This is our normal monthly CRS Users Group meeting. I have my fellow planning folks here from Dare County. The people from Currituck are on their way, and we meet on a monthly basis. We're all participants in the community rating system. And part of that means that we have these meetings and we have to do outreach activities. And one of the ideas that we came up with was to have local stakeholders come in and meet with us as part of our outreach activities. So last month we had the local surveyors come in and the local engineers, and we had Dan Brubaker from the state of North Carolina meet with us. We've had an issue come up about what's the appropriate diagram to use on elevation certificates. We may or may not talk about that today. We'll see how time goes. But we're having the insurance and the mortgage guys in here today, the professionals today, so hopefully you guys can help answer some of the questions that we have as we transition to these new flood maps next year. We're going to have realtors in later on, and we'll have home builders on. One thing before I forget this, we have a survey that's on the Dare County webpage about flooding. And when you leave here today, if you would take 5 minutes and fill that out, we'd greatly appreciate it. The burning question is when is Dare County going to get their flood maps? And I wished I could tell you that answer. I am extremely frustrated with the state of North Carolina about these maps. They tell me one date, and that date comes and it passes. And what they're telling me now is that we should get our letter of final determination in September or October of this year. So what that means is once we get that letter of final determination, that gives us a 6-month deadline or a 6-month date of when those maps will be adopted. So if we get that in February, if we get that in September or October, it would be in the spring of next year when those maps are effective. Do I have confidence that that's going to happen? No. The only thing that I have confidence in is that the state of North Carolina knows that I'm extremely frustrated with them. And so I think they might be just a little bit afraid to come back and say, Donna, we're not doing your maps again. When Mr. Brubaker left here last month, I know he knew that we were all aggravated with that. So the Currituck maps are effective. She'll talk about those when she gets here. I don't know if you guys have looked at the Dare County maps, the new flood maps. I've spent some time looking at them. Right now, we have 14,000 plus properties that are in an AE zone or a VE zone. The revised maps are dropping that down to 11,672 properties. 8,493 will remain in the AE zone, but even those that are remaining in the AE zone, they're having their base flood elevations drop. So AE8s are dropping to AE4s. A lot of the properties that were in the VE zones are decreasing. We're only going to have 124 properties in the VE zone. We're having 2,890 properties as a shaded X zone and 3,076 properties in the X zones. So that's a big drop. Some of these properties that are moving to the X and the shaded X zones are properties that have historically and repeatedly flooded in Dare County. We don't think that the maps accurately reflect the flood risk in Dare County. We are afraid that people who are in an AE zone now are going to move to an X zone and they're going to discontinue their flood insurance. And that's not something that we want to see happen. We're concerned that 10 years from now, if the flood maps revert back to a higher elevation, that those properties are going to be rendered non-conforming, or people that have chosen to discontinue their flood insurance are going to get popped with a really high insurance bill. I'm just going to go through some of these maps real quickly. This is the Hatteras Village maps. On the left-hand side are the effective maps. You'll see we've got that big swath of VE along the ocean front there. On the new maps, that's the yellow area. That's a shaded X area. So those properties that are VE zone are moving to a shaded X area now. That's the area there in Isabel when Hurricane Isabel rolled through that was heavily damaged. This is Rodanthe. This is the new maps. You'll see lots of shaded X up there. The yellow areas are the shaded X. You'll see those little red boxes on there. Those are all houses that were damaged and flooded in Hurricane Irene. Same thing for Kylington. The map in the top left-hand corner is the effective maps. The map down in the bottom right-hand corner is the new maps. Again, you'll see lots of shaded X and even X zones. The white area is the X zone. The red boxes are the houses that were flooded in Hurricane Irene. The thing with Kylington that we're concerned about and a lot of the other subdivisions that have those finger canals like that is people have ground floor enclosures. And I'm sure they're all legal ground floor enclosures. But with the new maps, I'm concerned that those property owners that have those ground floor enclosures are going to think, okay, we've got found living area there. And that's something that concerns us. So what are we going to do about the maps? We're going to adopt the maps as they come out from FEMA, whenever that happens. We're going to use those for insurance rating purposes. But because of these concerns that we have about the flooding, we're going to come in with an overlay district, a regulatory overlay district. And when I'm up here talking and saying we, I mean just Dare County. I'm talking only for Dare County. I can't speak for the towns. I have one of my commissioners here. Now I have briefed my Board of Commissioners on the flood maps a couple of times, and there is support for this regulatory initiative that we're doing because they share the same concerns that I do. So the idea that we've come up with is have the flood maps for insurance rating purposes, but we come up with what we're calling a local elevation standard that would apply in the AE zones. We have a 1-foot freeboard now. That freeboard's probably going to go up to 3 feet. The VE zones would remain at a 1-foot freeboard, but our X zones and our shaded X zones, we're going to treat them as if you're in a flood zone. We're going to pick a number that's based on past elevations of flood maps and the 06 maps. We don't want to go higher than what the 06 maps are, but we're going to say if you're in a shaded X zone and your natural grade is not 8 feet, then you have to elevate your structure. You have to give us an elevation certificate. If you have an enclosure, you have to put in flood vents. You can't use it except for parking, access, and storage. So that's the idea that we've come up with. We want to make sure that people understand just because they're in an X zone doesn't mean they're not going to flood. We want to make sure that if the flood maps revert, that we're not faced with all these non-conforming structures, and we want to make sure that people don't convert those ground floor enclosures into living space because we know that those ground floor enclosures flood. So that's what we're doing from a regulatory standpoint. Again, what I just said, increased freeboards, X zones treated as a flood zone. What else are we doing? We have a big educational push because we know that people don't necessarily understand insurance. I don't understand insurance. I thought that I did until we had a meeting with Mr. Brubaker last month. I thought I understood what an elevation certificate was and what diagram 6 was used for, but we're back to the drawing board on that, and that's a whole nother topic. But we all meet as CRS community, as CRS planning departments, and we all do outreach activities. We're required to every year for our points. And so we were doing outreach activities in Dare County, and Kill Devil Hills was doing them, and Mania was doing them. And last year we thought, you know, why don't we pool our resources and come up with a unified theme so that we're all saying the same thing, using the same topic, so that if people are hearing it from more than one source, maybe it'll click. Maybe they'll think, okay, Kill Devil Hills is saying the same thing. I've heard that before, and they'll remember it better. So what we did is we came up with this slogan, low risk is not no risk. And we also developed a web page, obxfloodmaps.com. And you'll see we've got these groovy little bumper stickers here, this slogan that we've come up with, low risk is not no risk, and a couple of taglines. Floods happen anywhere, and don't be fooled by the X zone. Get flood insurance. We also developed these brochures. There's some at each of your seats. It talks about flood insurance. It talks about flood risk. It has the county seal. It has all of the seals of the towns in Dare County. It has the low risk is not no risk. We give these out as part of our direct mailings. I've given them to realtors. I've given them to insurance agents. And I have envelopes back here today. And when all of you leave today, I'd like you to take some back to your offices so you can distribute them to your clients. It's a really good brochure. We spent a lot of time developing, and so we would appreciate you doing that. So next year, we know that if the maps are eventually adopted next year, and I'm hopeful that they will be, that we're going to have this really strong push for flood insurance because we're concerned that people are going to drop their flood insurance. And that's not what we want to have happen. So we're doing all these stakeholder meetings, and we're going the extra effort. And if you have any suggestions on how we can get people to keep their flood insurance, we want to hear them. Why do we have you here today? In our monthly meetings, we've talked about, well, you know, what happens when we get our new flood maps? What are the mortgage companies going to do with the people whose properties that they have an AE policy now? Or do they automatically transition to an X-zone policy? I don't know, and I need you guys to tell me that. How is it going to affect your insurance rates? And you guys may not know that either, but you can help educate us so that when we talk to our property owners, we can give them answers, because I get lots of calls, and I don't want to say, well, gosh, I don't know. I want to be able to say, well, you know, I've been told this. You do need to call your insurance agent, but I want to be able to say something a little bit more than, gosh, I just don't know. So that's why we have you here, because we want you to help educate us so we can help educate our property owners and our citizens. And I'm going to open up the floor for comments and questions after we have the Currituck folks come up here and talk about their flood maps, because their maps are in effect. They were 6 months ahead of us tracking. Don't ask me why the state rolled out Currituck instead of Dare County. I don't know what the answer to that is. I've asked those guys that before, and they don't have an answer for me. But anyway, I'm going to let Laurie come up here and talk about her maps and what they've experienced since they've had those adopted. And
thank you guys all for coming. And like Donna said, our flood maps became effective for regulatory purposes in November of last year, but for insurance purposes in December of last year. Let's see, we've been participating in the National Flood Insurance Program since 1984. The previous maps were effective from 2005 to 2018. The maps that are now effective, we think, go back further or more similar to the maps that were in effect prior to 2005. And like Donna said, we were 6 months ahead of them. We've been talking about new flood maps since 2015, November of 2015, but it took up until December of 2018 before us to go through the process, get all the feedback from the public, feedback from FEMA, And there's our effective dates for December 25th, 2018. We had a big change in our flood maps, significant change in the special flood hazard area with our base flood elevations. Currently, we have over 100, this is an old presentation, sorry. The previous maps, we had a significant drop from the old maps to the new effective maps. You see that only 2% of the acres in the special flood hazard area has a BFE, a base flood elevation greater than 4 feet. So we've seen a significant change in that. And just the amount of acres that are with the higher level of protection with a BFE of greater than 4 feet. Corolla has seen a big change. With the new maps, we went from over 2,000 buildings in the special flood hazard area to less than 200. So we've seen a significant drop in the number of buildings. We've seen nearly a 90% decrease in our V-zone properties. I mean, that's crazy to us. So we've got concerns about that. And in the Corolla and the off-road area, you've seen the big change right there, the big drop in our firms. So at the time that our new maps came out, we didn't have the support to do something like a local elevation like Dare County is. So everybody was just excited that, oh, I'm coming out of the flood zone, we're going to open up property for development and things like that. So we didn't have that. In that between 2015 and 2018, we had new elected officials come on board, and we did have support for an increase of the 2 foot of freeboard in the special flood hazard area. So when our maps became effective, we got that 2 foot of freeboard in the special flood hazard area. It's not county-wide or anything like that. And we think that the firms are not a good representation, like Donna was talking earlier, not a good representation of rainfall flooding or nuisance flooding. Maybe it's good for some wave action and storm surge, but on the mainland and even in areas in Corolla and the off-road where we know things don't drain well, we have wind tides impacting drainage, which is not a good representation. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to go about handling some of those issues. This is Tolls Bay Colony, and the blue is this is probably not the best map, but the blue is the effective maps. The new maps are now that we now adhere to. Everything, all the green parcels that are outlined in green, are what were in the special flood hazard area. So you see a significant change in Tolls, in the Tolls Bay Colony area, which is an area in the northern part of the county with lots of canals. So we know we know historical flooding issues, canal issues, drainage issues, lots of fun things going on up there, but a significant change in those properties. Here's another example of whalehead in Corolla. Once again, the blue area is the area now. This is called the special flood hazard area on our new firms. And everything that was outlined in green were the parcels that were in the old maps under the special flood hazard area. So we've seen a significant decrease. Basically, once you get off the ocean front, those areas in wellhead are, they say that they're not, and if you've ever been, wellhead's a bowl. And we had to put in a significant amount of county infrastructure, the stormwater management, and we have a pumping system that helps keep that helps alleviate some of that, but more than just the ocean front is going to be affected in wellhead. So that's kind of where we are, Currituck County right now, and I'll just turn it back over to Donna to get some input and we get back to, well.
Thank you. I don't know if any of my other planners want to stand up and say anything. I'll certainly share the mic with you. Don't be shy. This is just not my program now. But if you guys don't want to say, Meredith, I've never known you to be shy about speaking. Yeah, come on, girl.
The Dare County maps were a significant change. In Killable Hills, our maps were probably the most dramatic change to the flood maps, and I don't have a slide. but we're going from about 5,000 properties in the flood zone to about 500 properties in the flood zone. And anybody who spends any time in Kildable Hills, we do have flooding issues. We have flooding issues that are not only on the ocean front. Majority of our ocean front now, if you are 5th Street, which is Kmart South, you're gonna be in an X flood zone on the ocean front. Between the highways is the X flood zone. On the sound side, most of that is the X flood zone. So we in Kildable Hills are very much promoting people to maintain their insurance, not only because they're gonna flood. We know, we have pictures. Here's the house you just bought in 4 foot of water. But because we feel like there's also gonna be a map correction, and the next maps are gonna come out, and people are gonna go, I have to get flood insurance again because I still have a mortgage, and that insurance is gonna cost them so much money that it's gonna be very bad for the economy in Kildable Hills. People are not gonna be able to maintain their house if they have to go back to the actuals instead of a lot of these grandfathered flood insurance. We are looking to the insurance brokers to help us help them by maintaining their flood insurance, encouraging them to keep their flood policies, because I think there is going to be a correction. I don't know if it's going to come from a storm or it's going to come from all of us complaining so much about how we didn't think the formula was quite right for how these maps were done. But so help us keep people insured and protected, protect them from themselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Meredith. So, anybody else?
Quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
So you guys are talking to the state and national, officials about the correction or how you feel about the maps. Is there any response from them, or have you discussed with them about drainage issues? Because they don't take into account, as I understand it, like a stormwater standing issue that we get a lot too. So are they gonna maybe adopt that or even think about it?
What they've told us, and I'm going to paraphrase what they told us, is that they have to use the model that FEMA tells them to use, even though there's other models out there that may be more accurate. They're not the FEMA model, and so they have to use the FEMA model. But the FEMA model and the flood maps don't account for rainfall. It's just your 1% annual chance of flooding. But property owners think that the flood maps are the end-all to be-all. And Mother Nature doesn't follow a flood map. And so we've tried. When I tell you that we've tried with the state and the federal government, mostly the state because they're the ones that are preparing the maps, we've made the good faith effort. I feel like we have anyway. Come on, Joe.
And Joe Hurd, the Director of Community Development with the Town of Duck. Just a couple things to add. Dawn had mentioned that she could only speak for Dare County, but I did want to be clear that for well over a year, pushing 2 years now, we've been meeting as planning staffs, going back to our elected officials, and really what we're looking at is everyone in Dare County is looking at a similar approach to what she described. It's not just going to be unincorporated Dare County, so all of the towns are looking at similar solutions as far as establishing that elevation. To the degree possible, we're looking at trying to be as consistent as we can with what we adopt. In working particularly with the realtors and home builders, really respect that's a strong interest of theirs, and that they don't have to jump around from community to community and have different standards. So to the degree that we can, with the understanding we all have elected officials with different perspectives and priorities, we're going to try to be as consistent as we can with that as those are adopted. The other thing I just wanted to clarify is that this is not the intent of this is not to require existing properties to go in and retrofit. Where this would apply is if somebody's coming in to build something new, cases where they're doing renovations or additions to properties, that's when this is going to kick in. So just to be clear on that.
Thank you. And as Joe said, we have been working on this for the past couple of years, and we've had support from the realtors and we've had support from the home builders, and that in and of itself is unusual because typically the home builders and the realtors sometimes don't always agree with what the planning departments do. I know that's hard to believe, but we've had a lot of support from them and we've worked very closely with them. And I think that that's important because they get it just like we do. And they don't want to have to advise their clients any differently or put them at risk in what for a lot of people is their most significant investment. So I'd love to hear from anybody from the insurance industry or the mortgage industry about what you guys do.
Morning, everyone. I'm Madeline Land with Midget Insurance. So I can share what we've seen some with the new maps with Currituck County. If someone has a flood policy and it is already renewed, our flood department is automatically changing those policies to a preferred risk flood policy, which is what you get in the X flood zone. Usually they are less expensive, oftentimes provide more coverage. So that's a good thing, because if someone's policy is already paid, it gets automatically transferred to the the preferred risk flood policy, they're likely to keep it. Now when it comes up for renewal, they may have that option to not renew it, which is my job to convince them to keep it. I'm really glad to hear that the counties and towns are concerned, because looking at the preliminary flood maps, we should all be concerned. There are definitely well-known flood areas that are shifting to the X. The other point is talking about possibly things changing after this. It's going to be beneficial to those people to maintain their flood insurance. If you maintain your flood insurance, it's going to be a lot easier if your zone changes again, rather than dropping it and starting all over. So hopefully we can just all be on the same page and just convince people, especially if it's minimal cost, to keep their flood insurance coverage, because we know there's going to be flooding.
Now, I will tell you that one thing that we've been told is that automatically switching to a preferred risk is a positive thing, but in some instances, if you have an AE policy, that it may be better to keep that AE policy versus the preferred risk. Could you speak about that?
Flood insurance, the rating really depends on the structure. So sometimes we do see when you have houses that are elevated high, no enclosures, or if they have an enclosure, it's unfinished, properly vented. Sometimes those AE rates can be less than the X flood zone. The preferred risk flood policies, X flood zone policies, do automatically come with contents coverage, whereas when you're in the AE zone, you have a standard flood policy, that's optional. A lot of times people, because their lender requires it on the building, they just carry it on the building and they don't carry contents. So, okay.
We've also heard from different sources that if you switch to your preferred rate policy, that when you go to switch back, if you have to, that you are starting over. The preferred rate does not carry that grandfathering as if you kept your full policy. Is that correct?
I don't know if that's changing. In the past, when we've written flood insurance, if we can grandfather and show that when the house was built they were in, like the X flood zone, they can indeed get a grandfather policy rather than being rated in the current zone. I'm not the flood guru, I'll tell you, but just wanted to share what I've experienced so far, especially with the Currituck maps changing.
What about elevation certificates? Should people keep their elevation certificates? I mean, is there a value to that?
Yes, I'm not sure, Rhonda, maybe you can help me on this.
Absolutely. You want to have that elevation certificate, because that's going to give you what the actual building is, because X zones do not look at elevation. It is what it is. But if you do switch back, you want to make sure you know what your elevation is, because that bottom floor may not be covered. And a lot of times in an AE, especially a VE, you have no coverage down there. Garages, etc. You're just too low. You're below base flood. You're done.
That's probably another point. If people have to be really careful with that enclosure, that if they're thinking, well, the rates are cheaper to stay in the AE, but how much coverage they actually get in that enclosure if they are in the X zone policy. So just as long as it's just storage or parking or whatever, that's fine. But we see a lot of people doing more than that down there, and it's basically almost full coverage. I'm not going to get into that, but basically almost, very limited to, wow, I actually have coverage down there when I flood. So that's a good point to think about.
That's the other concern too, is if they shift to the F flood zone, then now saying, okay, well, I can add an extra bedroom, let's enclose this bottom space, and that's what we want to avoid doing too.
And that's what we're going to tell them is no, you can't do that. Yeah.
Please don't do that.
No, that's what we're going to tell them as well. Anybody else?
Shay DeLuca, I'm with State Farm, Kimberly Carroll Agency. So what we found is that a lot of our flood policies are canceling because they were escrowed. And so it's like the mortgage companies are finding out way before anybody else because we don't get a, here, this flood policy has now, or this zone has now changed. We have to dig into ours every single month to find out, did this one change? Are they actually going to go to the X zone because they had so many claims? That's another thing. If they've had a certain amount of claims in the past, they're not going to put them in the preferred risk, right? So we've actually found that some of those are higher if you try to manipulate that. And so it's best that you do your due diligence up front, check and make sure that they're eligible for the preferred risk before you just start making changes to the policy. Although we work directly through NFIP, so they're pretty good about catching those for us, and they'll give them normally or usually the best rate. Doesn't mean it's the best coverage, but it is the best rate. So what we're trying to do is catch those before they cancel and call our insureds to let them know. Just want to let you know, your mortgage company did not pay your flood policy this year because of this reason. But we have to find out up front, we have to do a lot of digging around to make sure or let them know what their premium's going to be and give them hopefully good news. Hey, it's only going to be this much now. But if it has gone up, then we still have to have that conversation with them. Luckily, we've been pretty good about keeping our flood policies. I think because we do everything up front and call our insureds, and we've actually discussed in our office trying to have our insureds actually sign an agreement saying that they've declined flood insurance. We've always done that for X zones. So we're trying to do that now. It's easier when you're purchasing a house to have everybody sign everything up front. So we are getting some people that are like, nah, I don't want to sign anything. But we're trying to keep lots of records because we're worried that a flood's going to happen, as always. And a lot of our insureds are then going to be knocking on our door very upset that we didn't give them.
Didn't tell them what they needed to know.
Exactly.
Right. And I think with the escrow, I think that's part of the problem is that some people might not even know that they have flood insurance as part of their escrow. And so if it's not in their escrow, they're going to choose not to keep it because they can't afford whatever it is at that one time, as crazy as that sounds.
And they have to pay up front. They can't put it on a monthly installment or anything like that. So even if it's only $725, $750, that's where we're finding it's around. They just don't want to pay it. So we're trying to really encourage that.
I think talking too, I think mortgage companies probably required because of the act that they follow. I think they actually send a letter to the homeowner saying, hey, you're not in a flood zone anymore, so you can basically drop your flood insurance coverage. I mean, not picking on lenders, but it's a letter that says, hey.
I need to hear from some of the banks, guys, that are here.
I can't speak on it, but I'm assuming that's exact, ours is out. Sorry.
So who takes care of First Bank Mortgages? He's in Wilmington, but he'll cover the whole coastal region. And I think exactly what Jackie just said, that's
And
kind
you
of.
don't mean it to say that
Exactly.
way, but because of the act, they can't require you to carry it anymore, so
Exactly.
they have to let you know
Mhm.
you don't have to carry it.
Exactly,
And they don't
so far.
mean it like you're not gonna flood, but that's
If I got that letter and didn't know anything about insurance, I would be crazy.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's exactly what's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen. Anybody else?
I'm Jenny Turner with Currituck County Planning, and I just kind of wanted to speak to the mortgage companies and the changes in the flood zone since we've kind of gone through the whole process and maps are effective, and we've gotten lots of calls about this. Some mortgage companies do send out those letters and go ahead and, let the property owners know, you're no longer in the flood zone, you're not required to have flood insurance. They close the escrow account, they send you your money back. Some do not. Some of our property owners have tried to communicate to their mortgage company directly, hey, we've had a community remapping, I'm no longer in the flood zone. And the mortgage company, their response is, give me a LOMA. And communicating that to the mortgage company that, no, I don't need a LOMA, there's a community remapping is difficult. And the insurance agents are key in this whole thing. Like you were saying, trying to be out in front, know who of your policies are going to be changing, and then reaching out to them and letting them know what their options are to keep flood insurance. And also just communicating to the lender on behalf of the property owners, because when property owners call us at the county, we send them to you because you're the one that have the information about what's the policy going to cost, and you're the one that can communicate very effectively with the mortgage company. I did have a couple of notes just from our experience from since we had the maps that are effective, some things that have kind of occurred that I thought were interesting. We did have some properties mapped along our floodways that were not in the special flood hazard area before but are now. Most of those properties were high enough to qualify for LOMAs, so we've helped those property owners get LOMAs on those properties. Another thing that I thought was interesting is if a lot was filled prior to being designated a special flood hazard area, then it's not considered a LOMA based on fill, it's just a LOMA. And if FEMA questions that, then the community can send a letter saying that the fill was placed prior to the special flood hazard area designation. I already covered that mortgage companies will say they need a LOMA. I actually had a gentleman call recently. He actually had called his mortgage company. They said, you need a LOMA. He called the insurance company, said, I need a LOMA. The insurance company was like, well, you need to call the county. And so we just kind of had to communicate, no, he doesn't need a LOMA. You just need to, communicate that to the mortgage. So it really is important for the insurance agents to be involved in this process.
Do you have to put that in writing for them?
No, I mean, it's really if you can send them to an insurance agent and then as the community official, and just let them know. If the insurance agent doesn't understand what you're saying, just tell them to call me and we'll help you get it straight. Another thing that happened in Currituck is now I just wanted to ask, and I'm sorry I missed the first part of your presentation. Have you guys received your letter of final determination yet? No, you're still waiting. Okay. So when you do that whole process, you'll get a summary of map actions that shows all the changes to all the maps, as well as what's called an LOMC, letter of map change valid letter. And that letter shows the LOMAs that are still in force, the LOMAs that are no longer necessary because the maps, LOMAs that are superseded. We did have one particular property owner whose LOMA should have still been in force but was not on that letter. And they ended up having to apply for a new LOMA, paying the flood insurance in the interim because it was officially in the flood zone for that period of time. Another thing in Currituck we're somewhat concerned about is the off-road area is designated as a COBRA zone. And so we have similar changes to the flood maps to this whalehead example in the off-road area where properties that were in flood zones are now no longer in flood zones. And that's a big thing with COBRA because in the COBRA zone, you're not eligible for federally backed flood insurance. So now that flood insurance isn't required with a mortgage anymore, we're probably going to see more development in the off-road area and already have seen some. Another thing is just once you have the maps, I don't know if any of Dare County is seeing an increase in any BFEs anywhere or additional special flood hazard areas that weren't before, but when we were issuing permits, we would check the new maps as well as the old maps, and just because some people were getting mapped that were not previously in the flood zone, just to let them know, hey, you're going to be mapped into this flood zone. This is your near-base flood elevation. You should really build to this level. And then once the maps were effective, we helped them get a LOMA. Just another comment about, somebody mentioned the ground floor enclosures. Just remember that if you're in CAMA's AEC, CAMA still has a requirement that you be pile supported. So even though there's not an elevation standard anymore, you still have to pile support your ground level living space.
Thank you. Excellent. No, thank you. Willow, you ready?
First of all, I would like to thank you for recognizing the partnership with the Outer Banks Association of Realtors and the Outer Banks Home Builders. I know there's a few folks here with the home builders, but the entire leadership of the Outer Banks Association of Realtors is here today to participate in this conversation and to learn about what is going on, other than just hearing it from me and Stephanie attending these meetings through the ones that you have. And also in Kill Devil Hills, I'm on that CRS team too. So first of all, a question for Currituck, for Laurie and Jenny, with regards to your freeboard requirement, that is only for those in the AE and VE zones, not in the X zone. So you have X zone properties on the ocean front that could technically build slab on grade. Currituck is not doing anything about that.
Not slab on grade, elevated, because CAMA still applies.
Because it can't, right. But freeboard, if it's X zone freeboard, your 2-foot freeboard, okay, gotcha, isn't applying there. You know, we're very concerned. I know we beg to be pleaded about not appealing the maps, let the maps go through for insurance purposes, because what's happening with FEMA and the NFIP, and I just came from a meeting with a FEMA director in May, and talking about eventually they want to see the flood maps go away, and they're going to be rating, risk rating 2.0 goes into effect October 2020, of which another layer is being added for risk, and that is your distance to water. And I said, well, what does that mean to the Outer Banks? Because we are surrounded by water, and we are very close to water from anywhere. And we will be paying a higher rate based on just a distance to water, not your flood risk elevation risk, not due to an elevation certificate. And that scares me with all the properties that are moving to the X zone. We need to do as much as possible. I was told that, I mean, it's hard, I know, when there's 178 properties now in a special flood hazard area compared to 2,300. How do our insurance folks talk to 2,000 people, you know, and make personal contact with over 2,000 people just in Currituck County to let them know of their options? And what I was told is that you definitely, if you're going from an AE zone to an X zone, it may be better, if we are looking still at mapping 10 years from now, to stay in that AE zone based on the elevation you have now, because you're so much higher than what is shown on the map. Your rate may be lower, you may not have as much coverage, but if you go back into an AE zone in the future, you will be grandfathered in, and not like going from an X zone. I was told going from an X zone and going into the AE zone or a VE zone, you will then be paying that rate that is in effect at that time. So I'm sure as we move along in conversation, I'll have more questions, but I did want to thank you. And this has been quite the process, because we saw this information in the spring of 2014, yes, that the base flood elevations were going down. So we're equally as frustrated that, you know, when are these maps going to be effective?
You know, Willow mentioned the risk rating 2.0, and I didn't want to cloud the issue today with that. I figured that's a whole nother meeting that we'd have to have on that. So anybody else?
Hi, Rita Holland with GR Little Agency. And I just want to touch back on the Currituck issue. I've had some property owners in the Whalehead area that their property is oceanfront, and it was in the VE zone, and it went to the X zone. Well, the flood companies that we deal with automatically were switching, if it was in EX zone, to the PRP. Well, this one particular client, he got the notification that his was going to a PRP, which, as you can imagine, from a VE to an X is a huge savings, no prior losses, so he qualified. He gets the refund check, then all of a sudden he gets notification from the flood company that it had been switched back to the VE zone. He started having issues with the lender, because the lender was pulling his flood determination and it was still showing that he was in a VE zone. Well, I went round and round with this particular risk. It turns out that his zone was right in the middle of his rear deck and pool area on his property. So that's another issue that you're gonna be faced with in some situations with oceanfront property. So I've had to go back to the mortgage company and send them verification proving that the house itself sits in the X zone. And based on FEMA's guidelines, as long as the foundation of the house is in the X zone or a lower risk, that's the zone the flood will be written in. So that opens up a big can of worms.
Yeah, so they went with the foundation of the house and not the deck?
Correct.
Yeah, was the deck attached to the house?
The deck is attached to the house, and at first I was going back and forth with the flood underwriters, and then they're the ones who told me that if the deck was attached, that no, that's part of the house. But then they read me how to rate based on FEMA's map, gave me the paragraph, the page, and all of this, and lo and behold, per FEMA's guidelines, attached or unattached, it did not matter. If the foundation of the house was in a less hazard zone, the entire policy was to be rated that way.
That's news to me. Yeah, we've always been taught attached or detached. I'm going to go out here and make a joke because Jackie will appreciate it. That must have been the guy, the underwriter there that was looking at that on Zillow, and that's how he knew that the deck was attached and not attached.
I'm not sure, but another thing that I just wanted to add, you know, I'm worried about all of these map changes as well as everybody in this room. I live in Kill Double Hills. I'm between, you know, the bodies of water. I'm not near any body of water per se, but I personally am in an X zone, and I've been flooded 4 times from torrential downpours. So I preach it. I mean, when these people call me and they have their properties going to a PRP and they think they don't need it anymore, I will preach it day in and day out. Keep it. I know firsthand what just a couple of inches of water and your ground level can do to you. It's devastating. I don't want anybody to have to go through that. I don't want to go through it myself again. So that's basically all we can do is educate our clients, tell them you know, the power of having that flood insurance, the necessity of it. If you have a claim, it's going to make a big difference in your life whether you have flood or you have to go for a small business loan in order to do whatever repairs need to be done.
Yeah, so we've got our work cut out for us to get that word out there, and I'm not really sure if we're going to be effective in that. We're really going to try. Yeah. I will tell you that there's a commitment at the county level. There's a strong commitment at the county level, and I know that's the same is true of the towns, because you have to protect people from themselves sometimes. That's what Meredith said, and there's the folks that are here, but then there's the folks that are moving here. Right. I attended a meeting in Buxton Tuesday night with the emergency management director and the guys from the National Weather Service. They had one in Kill Double Hills Monday night. I don't know if any of you guys went to it. But there was a guy there that had just moved here in October, and another guy who had moved here a year ago, and he was the planning director from somewhere in Pennsylvania, a retired planning director, and I just thought to myself, you know, well, it's good that you're here, but I hope that they understand what they're going to be faced with, and it's those people that are moving in that are being told, sure, you're in an X zone, you're good. And we know that that's not the case. All those people up on the north end of Roanoke Island that flooded last July from all that rain, they were all in an X zone. Yeah. All in an X zone.
I'm Jean-Paul Perron. I'm the president of OBRF this year. And I'm hearing concerns about what will happen if the maps revert back in a future revision. But also these maps, as was said, was very close to what they were pre-2005. So does anybody from the insurance remember how that scenario played out when we went from a map like this one to the previous map back in 2005 and how that affected everybody?
That's okay.
Jackie, and then we'll get an answer from Meredith in the back too.
So I worked for a long time for an agency in Kerala, so I saw a lot of that change, and that brought up a really interesting question about the grandfathering. When those maps changed, people that were really fortunate and had those X zone policies on the ocean front, I think at the time, in 2005, they were able to grandfather due to being built in compliance of that prior map. And around that time, I think that grandfathering rate was only about $1,300. It's gone up a lot since then. So I'm not sure, again, now with the grandfathering, if you stay in an AE versus taking the X policy and being able to grandfather, it was very beneficial to those people at the time, and I think it still is for those VE zones. So I would hope if that grandfathering rule still stays in effect, that they would see that benefit.
Well, I think that people will assume that they're going to be grandfathered, but that's not always the case, because the federal government can take that out of the Flood Act if they want to. Pass that down to Meredith.
You mentioned that the maps were back similar to before 2005. That's not the case in Kildable Hills. The maps that are being proposed in Kildable Hills are like no map that has ever come out since we've been in it since 1976. Our maps have consistently had about an elevation of 8 or 9, fairly consistently. We did have some additional X zones that were in the middle. They got changed over time that are going back, but majority in Kildable Hills, this map is like nothing that we've had historically at all. So if that happened in Currituck, I don't know how the other towns are, but Kildable Hills is not even sort of similar to where we've ever been.
I've got a question on the grandfather policies for insurance agents. Are you seeing those increases every year, increases in premiums yearly on grandfather policies?
I see heads nodding in the back.
Do you have a percentage or no? Okay.
There's a link from, this is just off the top of my head, they went from like 525 a year to 7.
Like a grandfathered AE policy? I guess it would just depend on the structure.
Yeah, it's so hard to just come out with a number, but they increase every year. It also depends on if it's a primary or secondary.
What about the properties that are coming from a VE to an AE? How are those insurance policies transitioning? Are they automatically transitioning to an AE policy?
Make it renewal.
So they'll automatically transition from an AE to an X at the time that the map change occurs, but on the VE, they keep it at a VE into an AE?
It depends. I mean, it depends on the carriers you're working with, how quick they are to catch it.
Right.
Speaking more of the last Currituck map in 2005, it took some carriers about 3 years to catch it.
To catch up? Okay. Well, that worked well for the property owners then, yeah.
My name is Tanya Parrish, and I'm with Currituck County Farm Bureau, and I'm going to speak to your question. How are you? We are seeing some of those, just like Mark was shaking his head. We are seeing an increase, an automatic increase, and it happens over a certain period of time. I don't know what the exact increase is. And that may end up happening if someone chooses to keep the AE, and they're thinking they're going to be grandfathered. They're not going to commit to saying, hey, look, these AE, if someone stays in an AE, they're definitely going to be grandfathered. I don't see anybody saying that is definitely going to happen. But as an insurance agent with Farm Bureau, and I know that Dare County office will agree, we are advocates in telling our clients that you need to keep your insurance policy, whether it be staying in the, with that AE price that they're in now or going to the X flood zone policy, keeping that. We are telling them, look, you need to keep flood insurance because we do know that we are going to see flooding. I think even they know that. I have clients that come in and I tell them keep this policy and they have told me, hey, look, my property has flooded, but I'm going to cancel this. Unfortunately, we live in a society where people will choose to go to Starbucks and have a cell phone versus protecting their properties and protecting their assets. So speaking from Farm Bureau as a company, and as our office, we are out there telling these people you do need to keep your insurance in place.
Well, I think, one thing that pops in my mind, and I don't want you guys to take this the wrong way, but I think sometimes when the insurance agents are advising their clients will keep their insurance policy, they're thinking, oh, she's just telling me that because she's getting a commission. Right. So I think that's why that's important for us as the local government to be that third party, if you will, that steps in and says, hey, you really do need to keep your flood insurance. We're not in cahoots with the insurance agencies. We're just doing that because we're trying to protect you from yourself. And so that's part of the perception there, I think. And I can imagine that that's a struggle.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Walker. I just think that we all need to be really cognizant of what we're telling property owners. Because if we look at history and we look at what happened in 2005, 2006 maps, when a lot of the ocean front changed, now we're going the opposite direction, and it's real easy for us to assume that what's going to happen when the maps change the next time is what happened last time. And we saw with Bigger Waters what a significant change there were in flood insurance, and I think that that's only going to get more restrictive and possibly be completely different the next time we have a map change than where we are right now. So I just think we need to be real careful. I think we certainly need to encourage them to keep their flood insurance, definitely hold on to those elevation certificates, because we don't know what's going to happen with those either. So that's just my 2 cents. But I think if we can all have the same talking points and all present the same information, whether we're insurance carriers or lenders or planners or realtors or home builders, if everybody's putting that same message out, it's going to be better for our whole community.
I'm Dorothy Hester. I'm the Public Information Officer for DARE, and I'm working with Drew Pearson, the Emergency Management Director, and we have a survey online, and it's related to flooding. And it asks some questions about has your property flooded, but it also, from the emergency management side, is asking about messaging, notifying people when there are weather conditions that we need to alert people. So if you live in Dare, please take the survey. It's on the website, darenc.com. The link is there. Share it with other people that live here. I know the towns are helping me get it out there, but July 26th, by July 26th.
5 minutes, even if that much. It's a real simple survey, but it's got some important questions in there. Jay's been very helpful with us in our drafting of our local elevation standard.
My name is Jay Overton. I'm with Albemarle and Associates, also with the Outer Banks Home Builders. I'm an engineer, surveyor, and a contractor. So I have to deal with other aspects of this that y'all don't. But I would like to appeal to the mortgage bankers and the insurance agents in here, because we're going to go through a trying time in another 2 or 3 years as these things start to get implemented and we start to directly affect property owners. And right now, the more that y'all can come together as groups and help us, because I think we're continuing to try to bring our community together and not be so bifurcated between, there's contractors over here, there's engineers over here, there's the municipality, there's mortgage bankers, there's insurance people. We all live together and our kids go to school together. And as a business community, the more that we can come together and help one another, it's going to be much better for our community. From a standpoint of doing elevation certificates or structural drawings, a lot of times the decisions that we make are based upon what we know. And unfortunately, I don't know what you know. And most of the time, I'll find out on this project what I needed to know a year from now when the project's finished, when there's feedback that comes from the mortgage industry or from the insurance industry. So this has become a very hot topic, if you will. We're all trying to find out from one another. So please go back and think about it, and in your own individual groups, come together and have some meetings and talk about it and bring some feedback. I mean, if y'all have got issues with the way that you're seeing things constructed, or elevation certificates and not understanding them, the more we know, the better we can provide services to you and to the residents. We're finding out things here recently on elevation certificates that we were told 10 years ago to do them a certain way, that the certificate ain't changed and the elevations haven't changed, but the way in which we're supposed to be filling them out now is different. So we're confused as well in trying to figure out what is the right answer. So don't feel like that y'all are in a special group of confusion. We're all confused as to what's got to be done. And again, the only way we're going to be able to come together and make this work is to work together. So I thank y'all for being here, and don't let this be the last time that you participate in this discussion. Continue to get up with Donna, find out when we're having meetings that involve other aspects of the industry. I don't think Donna has a problem with other industries coming. I mean, I'm here today, I'm not an insurance person or a mortgage person, but I want to learn from y'all how I can do my job better and how I can take care of my clients better. Thank you.
So does anybody have any ideas about how we can get the word out about flood insurance and keeping it, Willow?
Willow Kelly again. I was recently in a meeting with Department of Insurance Director, Dr. Michelle Osborne, who is with right hand Mike Causey, who is our insurance commissioner. And the Department of Insurance is actually holding some sessions across the state, town hall meetings with regards to flood insurance and flooding. I mean, even in Boone, North Carolina, she's having a session at Appalachian State University. Raleigh, Greensboro, I think Wilmington, they're going to have one in Brunswick County. We're trying to get that here, but in conjunction with we through the Association of Realtors and Home Builders spearheading an effort to have a community conversation on property insurance. I found in my several years of working as government affairs director with both associations, insurance was a very big topic. Property insurance as a whole, wind coverage, homeowners insurance, flood insurance, and now since flood mapping and whatnot is on the forefront, to bring that in, to have a community conversation with not just our members, but the public at large. And we're trying to pinpoint a date towards the end of September, early October for that meeting to be held here. Donna, you've certainly offered that the county is to do it, and we may need a bigger room and First Flight High School possibly. So there you go. And working with the towns as well. And we have some community partners that are involved in insurance, so we'd like to have panel discussion and really bring forth good information to the public. Just how to better understand your policy, empowering the policyholder. That's the focus of the event, and to bring in the North Carolina Department of Insurance as a partner as well.
Right, and Holly was speaking to me before the meeting. The closest one of those hearings that they're having is in New Bern.
It's in New Bern, and it's the 18th, July 18th.
Right, and Holly, I'm going to let you speak to that since you know more about it. But hopefully when you have that meeting in September or October, we'll know by then when our flood maps are going to be adopted. We'll have that letter of final determination.
Thank you. Holly with Town and Accent, Ollie White. I talked with the Department of Insurance, our regional contact, and I think they have town hall meetings, which I'm glad to hear you're involved in getting started, but they're also offering local trainings for insurance professionals, the nearest of which is in New Bern. I think the town hall is separate. Regional contact asked me to send him an email so that he could get support to bring that training. I think it's really focused around the areas that were damaged during Florence, kind of more geared toward the southeast coast. There's one or two throughout the Piedmont and western part of the state, but there again, maybe we could all partner together to let him know how important this type of training is for our insurance professionals in the Northeast. I think it's extremely important to the information that we're talking about as far as how we're going to handle flood insurance and flood insurance policies in the wake of the change.
Should we email the guy?
Yeah.
If you send me his contact, and I'll send it out to the email list that I sent out about this meeting, and so we can email him and maybe get them to have a meeting down here. We struggle with getting the folks to come out here and have meetings.
Yeah, it was interesting because not only is it training for those professionals, but our realtors that are required to have so many hours of continuing education, it serves as free CE credit for realtors. And but it is kind of like what I saw with based on flood insurance and encouraging people to keep their flood insurance, and we certainly could. I hope to bring that here. I think we had the most policyholders in the state.
We did.
And so I was quite surprised, like while we're in this conversation, that this area was overlooked considering the number of policyholders that we have.
Yes. Yeah, that was the point I was going to make, because we do have the most number of flood policies in the state of North Carolina. I just got information based on the end of March for my CRS update, and it's like 8,500 policies, which has dropped in the last couple of years.
I'm Richard Hess from Sun Realty. Most real estate companies have what I call a stock disclosure form that goes with our listing agreements or buyer agency agreements that talk about things about sleeping capacity for septic systems, ground floor enclosures, and flood insurance. But we added one to ours that actually says just because you don't have flood insurance doesn't mean you don't need it. And it actually encourages the buyer to go back and find out what the previous flood zone was and also check to see if there's ever been any flood claims on that property. It also kind of tells the sellers that they might want to keep their insurance because it could affect the value of their property when they're trying to sell it if it doesn't have flood insurance with it. So that's another thing that we can do, because as real estate agents, when something goes wrong, it's all our fault, and we know that, so we're trying to protect ourselves from that. But that's another good way to do it for sellers and for buyers, to let them ask the questions from the authorities so they can find out so they're not caught off guard.
Right. And I get lots of calls in my office anyway, and I'm sure the towns do.
Richard just brought this up, and I'd like to pose the question to those realtors that are here. We have so many out-of-town property owners that need to be educated on this. And while they might not be watching local cable access channel or seeing the brochures out and about, how are we contacting our out-of-town property owners about this issue?
How are those guys, or how are the local governments?
Property management folks that are here, I know we've got a couple, like how they communicate with out-of-town property owners.
Anybody gonna answer that?
I mean, use social media.
Okay.
I mean, that works.
Yeah.
Most firms maintain a pretty regular contact with their homeownership.
Yeah.
Newsletters, announcements, and so forth, regular email change. And so this, I can't speak to every firm, but I know most firms put that as a regular drumbeat in their communication. Now, open rates, your actual reception, respondents, who listens to you or not, it's one thing that we're telling them amongst a dozen, but it is being said.
Yeah. Property management communication is pretty regular, so that would be.
Yeah, I'd argue once the sale is complete,
I agree.
It falls on us to maintain that level of communication. And so we do try to report local events going on and things that are in their interest to be cognizant about.
Well, and I think once we get our letter of final determination and we all start having our hearings that we have to have, that OuterBanksFloodMaps.com, we'll be posting those dates on there so you guys can say, Dare County's having this meeting then. Because once we get that letter of final determination, we have to update our flood ordinances, and so we have to have public hearings. And as part of that update, we're going to be incorporating that local elevation standard in there. And so it's going to be important that all these folks that are sitting in here come to those public hearings and reiterate your concerns and your support for the local elevation standard to my Board of Commissioners so that they have a comfort level in what we're doing.
When that communication happens, it needs to be coordinated against the different industries and different verticals to that property owner that's out of town. Because while they may not listen to any one of us, if enough noise gets made and they get an official seal with a letter from Dare County or Currituck, and there's a certain level of alarm in that letter, they're going to be more likely to pay attention to the other things that are being said. So they're being
Right. So what we can do is once we have that date of that hearing and have some more specificity about what's going on, we can send out a letter that you guys can distribute to your email list or whatever, because we're not sending out letters to every property owner saying, hey, your flood zone's changing. It's incumbent upon out-of-town property owners to know what's going on with their property. But that will certainly help with that. I mean, and nowadays, people get direct mailings about zoning hearings, and they're more likely to see it on our webpage than they are anywhere else.
And as far as out-of-state homeowners and also primary homeowners, for Farm Bureau itself, they require us as agents to do a 5-year review. So we're getting in front of our clients. We don't have that requirement for our JUA policyholders, but as an agent, I kind of adopt that. So we are in contact with our policyholders as well. So we have that practice in place.
It's just going to support that the agents only contact me because they want to maintain the policy, want to keep their money going, and that they hear it from everyone else.
Right, absolutely. And they'll be hearing it from us. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, from the insurance standpoint, and with seeing, when the maps change for Currituck County, our agency conducts yearly reviews with every client, and I started the discussion like in January not knowing when Dare County maps were gonna change, but the reviews that I'm conducting, we're looking at the current flood map, we're looking at the preliminary map, we're having that conversation, not knowing when it's gonna change, but we're having that conversation so that way, when things do change, they get that letter from the lender. It's like, oh, Madeline's already talked to me about this. I know what I'm doing. So I think being proactive is one of the best things we can do, definitely.
I'm Danny, Dare County, unincorporated Dare County, of which all of Hatteras is the entire island is pretty much a flood zone. But do not forego your elected officials, because we're going to be listening to what this is, your municipal elected people, your county elected people. We're going to be depending on what the professionals have to say. So involve your elected officials as an asset. If you need to come up and do public hearing, that's going to be a way that it's going to be able to give us the advice that we need, the knowledge that we need. We're here to support you. We're not going to do anything outside the realm of what our professionals are telling us. So involve us as an asset. We want to hear from you. We need to hear from you. And in terms of getting the word out, some of these public hearings will work well, because when you have a public hearing, your press will be there. And whether or not somebody's in Pennsylvania or Virginia and doesn't want to be caught off guard, they are reading the local media. They're reading the OBX Today. They're reading The Voice. They're reading the Island Free Press. And so all this stuff can work hand in hand. Lastly, you know, with society being value-based, if we can impart to our clients that the nickel, with this stuff coming up, the nickel you want to save now is going to be the dollar that's going to cost you later. So look at it as an investment. Don't forego anything. Don't throw away anything, because when you do sell, with the way this thing is like a fireball, it's very nebulous, the way all this stuff is changing, any documentation you have in the past may very well be something that's going to make sure that there's going to be a smooth and successful transition.
I would advise you one more time to take that 5 minutes to answer the survey. I have packets of the brochures up here. Please stop and take some back with you. If you don't want to take them today, you can always email me and I will bring them to you. I have boxes of them in my office. I'd love to give some away today. Thank you once again for coming. I know that everybody's busy. This has been most helpful to me. And on behalf of my planners, I know that we've got some answers that at least I didn't have today, and I feel like this has been a worthwhile meeting. Thanks again. For more information on the CRS program or for the new flood maps for Dare County, you can contact me or visit obxfloodmaps.com.